What's going on, guys? Zedd here, bringing you another Marvel Midnight Suns video. Uh, this is one I was working on for quite a while. Just the documentation that we're going to go through alone was about 16 hours of work, never mind actually finding the information, taking the screenshots, so on and so forth. But I enjoyed it, and basically my plan with this, and the reason why it says anthology, is because I'm going to add to it. I'm going to flesh it out, obviously, later on when the game comes out. Things like boss guides, character guides, those are all going to be in here. So it'll just be a good resource for not only me to go back to, but also for you guys too, right? The link will always be in my videos. It'll be on my stream and all that stuff. So that's what this is. This video, though, specifically, is going to be sort of a precursor team compositional guide, or video, not guide, based on my opinions, who I think goes well, some card suggestions. I'm going to go through all this in just a second here, but a couple things to get out of the way. Number one, before people are angry for whatever reason and are like, oh, but Zedd, we don't know all the cards yet. Or, oh, but Zedd, we don't even know. No. Okay, like, that's not true, because if you look at all the cards that we do know about and that have been revealed, there's not just going to be some dramatic change of character that, you know, ruins a character's design, right? So here's how I want you to look at this, right? I want you to imagine that anything I say in here works and makes sense, but will just be enhanced by whatever cards we don't know about, right? So, you know, if I say this comp's meant to do this, these characters are meant to do that, it's like, well, that's true as of right now. I feel that would only be even more true, or they get even more options when we learn more about their cards, right? So keep that in mind. And again, as I said in my tier list video, which you can see on the bottom right of the screen here, these are just my thoughts and opinions. This is the kind of game that I like sink into. I go deep with the strats and the compositions and the deck building, which absolutely we'll get there. But yeah, enough of that. I'm gonna go through, explain what we're gonna do, and then yeah, we'll see what you think. Sit down, get a snack, get a drink. This one's a long one, a lot of chit chat. There will be timestamps down below if you want to just jump to a composition that you're interested in. But yeah, let's get right into it. So basically, what you're looking at is this will be the default page layout for all but one of the pages. In the top left, it will show you the team composition of the 3 characters. All of these, except for maybe 1 or 2, exclude the hunter. The reason for that is the hunter will be necessary sometimes and not other times. This will just be one of those things that, like, the hunter also has just so many cards that it's impossible for me right now to say, you know, use this build of the hunter, use that build of the hunter, use this one, because that we just don't know enough about what the hunter can do. So the hunter will be often omitted, save for one exception, which will make sense when we get there. So do keep that in mind, that these comps will be for when the hunter is not required, / if you can build your hunter in a way that sort of works with these comps, then fantastic. So that's what team composition is in the top left. Game plan. What does the team do? Pretty straightforward. Strengths and weaknesses. Good, bad. Pretty straightforward. Key cards. This is the biggest text on the screen for a reason. This is not the whole deck. Keep in mind, decks are 24 cards. That's 8 cards per character you bring. These are just suggested cards of the cards that we know of that go well with the composition that I have laid out. Eventually, I'll be doing full guides and deck lists, but obviously we're not there yet. And on the right side will be relevant information pertaining to that composition, as well as a breakdown of each card, or more, not a breakdown, but a reference as to why it's there. However, on this page, as it says, follow me on my socials if you enjoy the content. Sub on the YouTube, comment. I love all the interactions and I love the comments and questions, so please do keep those coming. Yeah, and then at the bottom right is just my most recent tier list. As of right now, I don't have any changes to make on it. Like I said, we're definitely going to revise it after my first playthrough and subsequent playthroughs thereafter, which will be a lot of fun. So this page here essentially is all the different compositions that I'll be talking about today, with the first 2 sections in greater detail than the third. Now what you're looking at here is I've sorted it by the first third rather, story, normal, heroic, difficulty teams, S. The S just simply stands for story. This is so that when the pages are sorted at the bottom, I know what's what. Story, normal, heroic difficulty means pretty much all the difficulties up until and including heroic level 1. There are, I believe, 7 or 8 difficulties in the game, and normal is the default one. Story is right before it, and then heroic goes heroic 1, 2, 3, and then ultimate goes ultimate 1 and 2, I believe, or ultimate 1, 2, and 3. Doesn't really matter. And then in the middle, it says heroic / ultimate difficulty teams. This means like heroic 3 and higher. And then main hero teams. This means that if you're the kind of person who's just like, nope, I'm running Nico. Nope, I'm running Ghost Rider. No matter what, I've just come up with sort of like a fun comp idea that always revolves around that character. Now, you'll notice I didn't make full breakdowns for those. And the reason for that is you can play if you're that kind of player and you're just like, nah, I'm buying this game for fun, I'm just gonna play Doctor Strange no matter what I do. Just put anything with him, right? Like it really is that simple. I just kind of threw something together. I thought it would be fun to talk about, but I will not be going in depth on character specific hero compositions unless they are in the first 2 sections. So to come back to that, what the difference between the first and second thirds is that the first one is a bunch of fun compositions. I think they're effective. I think they're good, and you can probably play them on the highest difficulty. But either they're a bit more random, or they're less consistent, or they just don't have really the same power level as the ones in the middle row. Things of that nature, right? So they're more designed for normal playthroughs for most players. Whereas if you're going to go into the higher difficulties, I think that any of those comps would be fine, or I wouldn't have even suggested them. But there's just going to be some issues with that. Now, last thing I want to mention before we move on is all of the characters in the game are represented in the first and second columns. So I don't want you to sit there and be upset that I'm going to just skim through the main heroes when I'm giving you a composition that has at least one of the heroes you're interested in and fully breaking it down. Okay, so there's something here for everybody. If you're a theory crafter like me, let's talk about it in the comments, tweet me or whatever. And yeah, if Christopher Odd watches this video, hello sir, I hope you enjoy. Now, main hero teams, M. Oh, that's what the M stands for. Those are, main hero teams is where the comps revolve around that particular character. I'm actually going to talk about those first, and the reason for that is I don't want to backtrack to this page. I'd rather just carry on. So, the main hero comps. I'm going to go top down, left, right. So, for example, it'll be Blade, Cap, Marvel, blah, blah, blah. So, Blade composition is revolving around Blade, okay? I'll take my time on this one, that way it's a bit clearer. Blade composition with Doctor Strange and Magik, you'll notice there is no tank. This is because if you take Doctor Strange and Magik, you can essentially pocket Blade enough to where he's fine. Blade also does have lifesteal. Doctor Strange has the ability to give concealment through one of his cards. He can also peel in different ways with knockdowns. Magik can do the same thing, right? She has all that CC. What this comp looks to do is essentially buff the heck out of Blade, and Magik, it basically groups them all up with her gather ability and her forceful knockbacks to group people up. And Blade gets in there and just kills everything, right? Like, that's the idea. But you will notice there's a Blade composition on the left side that will go into full breakdown, so I'm going to skip to the next one. But to double support Blade, I think, could be really strong if you take the cards that can sort of work around not having a tank. And Magik is actually one of those characters. One of her heroic legendaries, which we'll talk about, called Darkchild, essentially makes her a tank for 1 turn. So that's a very effective card to take in that situation. So that's the Blade comp. Next one down is Captain America. So when you're kind of making this about supports and tanks, it's a lot more difficult because it's hard to make that character the carry, but I think it's totally viable. So in this one, Captain America actually does do quite a hefty chunk of damage. The only catch is he needs block. So we take Iron Man and Magik. We take Magik to sort of control the enemies and put them in a line because Captain America's ultimate is damage enemies in a line and consume your block, so Magik can set them up and he can knock them down, essentially. Iron Man is there mostly to be the support. It's interesting, right? Because he's a DPS, but Iron Man has incredible support cards, and we're going to talk about those later in this video. But one of the key ones in this particular case is, I think it's called Heads Up, where he provides block to an ally. So that will just further enhance Captain America's damage. So that's that. Captain Marvel. She is a bruiser. She is a hybrid between a tank and a DPS, if you don't know what bruiser means. And then we have Ghost Rider and Nico. So Ghost Rider in this situation is there because, excuse me, he can provide a drop or death pit, as we call it. And since Captain Marvel is both a tank and a DPS, you don't really need DPS. And so Ghost Rider is here mostly for CC, as well as opening a drop. Now, why didn't I put Magik there? Well, I didn't put Magik there because Nico's here. So when you take Nico and Magik, there has to really be a lot of damage sort of coming through your third character. Whereas in this one, I think Ghost Rider as sort of like the off carry makes a little more sense in my mind. And then Nico on the third one there, she is there because, excuse me, Ghost Rider, from what we know, and Captain Marvel, they don't really have buffs and debuffs. They're actually quite lacking in that department. And so Nico would make that up while being a support, and then she also brings good damage. So this comp in general just hits really, really hard. And then Nico provides those buffs and debuffs that Marvel and Ghost Rider are somewhat lacking. Okay. Next up, Doctor Strange. So Doctor Strange comp, I mean, you're going to see him a lot, and you're going to hear him a lot in this video. I think he's the strongest top 2, top 3 character in the game, and it's not even a contest in my mind. But if Doctor Strange is your carry, you need people to facilitate that. So as a support, the only thing Doctor Strange doesn't really have is buffs and debuffs in a surplus. If you think about, if you compare it to Nico or Wanda, aka Scarlet Witch, who you see in the comp there, he doesn't really have the debuffs. And so Scarlet Witch is there mostly as a debuffer, right? She obviously hits really hard as well. And then Wolverine is there because he'll provide sort of that off damage that you would be missing from Doctor Strange, as Doctor Strange doesn't really slap without heroism. So the other thing with this composition is you actually you want them to all sort of be together. It's sort of a clumpy composition. So Scarlet has benefits for that, being close to their teammates. Wolverine has an AoE taunt around him, right? And then Doctor Strange can facilitate people nearby as well. So the whole comp, yes, it does revolve around Strange, but Doctor Strange is one of those characters where I had said a few minutes ago, it's really hard to make him the carry. I think it's a lot easier to run him in every composition than it is to make him the carry in every composition. But I think if you try it, and you try just Wolverine as sort of a hybrid DPS tank, and then Wanda as your debuff and your AoE damage, that's a pretty strong composition. But the reason why it's not meta is because if your goal is to have Doctor Strange your carry, you're going to build him a lot differently than how I'm going to be building him on these pages. Got my coffee ready, I know I'm going to need it. So that's that. Next up, Ghost Rider. This one, I feel like this one's a bit of a gimme, right? So Ghost Rider, Magik, and Spiderman. Correct. You're going to knock them into death pits. So Ghost Rider, as your carry, he does massive damage in an AoE. He does have some negative effects built into his kit, or baked into his kit, but the cool thing about Ghost Rider carry, and partially why he's one of the most viable carries in this context, is his passive stacks up based off of how many KOs he gets. So if you really like Ghost Rider, regardless of how you want to play the team, I think you should try it. I'm gonna try it for sure. He's on my list of carries to try. Like Iron Man, I think is just the most prestigious DPS carry in the game, but I think Ghost Rider, in a different way, could be quite scary as your what's the word? Your linchpin, if you will, and then you add 2 people around him. I think he could easily carry. I'm kind of like Blade in that respect, who we will also come back to. But Magik, so Magik again opens up a drop. Ghost Rider and Magik, they both have forceful knockbacks, opening drops. You're just yeeting kids into holes, right? Like that's the whole thing. And then Spider-Man having incredibly strong environmental attack game as well as burst damage, something that, or pardon me, not burst damage, as well as chain damage. It's something that, you know, they're kind of lacking between Ghost Rider and Magik. And then also Thwip. Thwip is very strong. It's one of the strongest CCs in the game. And so Spider-Man as the DPS kind of provides that missing thing. What's the catch? There's no tank, right? So because there's no tank, you are relying on double death pits, lots of CC, lots of control, and I think it's quite a technical composition. It's silly, it's memey, but I think there's a better way to play that composition, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but I think that could be a lot of fun. Next up, Ironman. This is the only example, I think, yeah, I think it's the only example on the list where the composition is exactly the same as one that I'm going to be talking about in great detail. So I'm just going to skip over it. The Ironman comp is one of the strongest comps in the game, in my opinion, so we'll come back to him. Magik comp. So this one's a bit weird, right? If Magik is your carry, how do you... like, how does it make any sense, right? She does okay damage. She has a lot of knockbacks, but that's sort of it. So the idea with this comp is Captain Marvel and Wanda, they both have a ton of just raw damage output in an AoE, right? Captain Marvel will act as sort of your secondary tank, but also of the 2.5 tanks, Wolverine and Captain America being the main two, and then Captain Marvel I've now realized is a bit of a pseudo tank if you need her to fill that role. She has like plenty more knockbacks than Wolverine and more than Captain America. So she is pretty powerful at being a knockback character. So she synergizes really, really well with drops and Magik in general. And then Wanda will provide buffs and debuffs. Again, something Magik and Marvel lack severely, while bringing that sort of beefy damage that you might be missing just by relying on Magik and Marvel. So, again, like Doctor Strange, it's tricky, right, to make a comp revolving around supports. So, I think it could be a lot of fun. I think it'd be pretty good. Next up is Nico. Nico, Wolverine, and Hunter. So this is the only build where I have the Hunter in there specifically, and it's because Nico has a lot of extremely powerful exhaust cards, particularly her legendary heroism card. Crack the Sky, I think it's called. It's absurdly strong. And the catch is, even when upgraded, it is always, always, always exhausted, meaning that it leaves the deck forever for the rest of that fight. However, Hunter, specifically down the light tree, has a skill where the next Hunter card that would be discarded is not discarded or something like that. I think it's called Holy Gift. Upgraded, that's the next card, period. Like the next ally card. So what I'm getting at is you can use Nico as your carry because she does a little bit of everything. Buffs, debuffs, high damage, support, utility, blah, blah, blah. And then when it comes time to use her heroic card, use the Light Hunter ability Holy Gift beforehand. Then you maintain Crack the Sky. Right? So this is one situation where I think going out of your way to take the Hunter will be the best choice. And then I have Wolverine in there as a tank because Nico is not going to have high DPS uptime, right? It's going to be very regimented, very bursty. And so Wolverine will just give that flexibility to sort of bring chain strikes, right? So he'll have a lot of peppery damage, sort of filling in the blanks. Is something that the Hunter and Nico aren't super, super good at. So yeah, I think Wolverine works really well in this situation. And that's the Nico comp. Next up, Wanda, or Scarlet Witch. I'm going to use those names interchangeably. She straight up sort of is a carry, but the gimmick with this team that I was going for was buff and debuff. So you have Wanda, whose passive is to literally debuff, and then you have Nico, whose whole thing is to literally debuff. But why Captain America? So Captain America is there because for Wanda to apply debuffs to foes, she has to be near them. Now, you could say, oh, I'll just take Wolverine and use his AoE taunt. That's a good idea. Or I could use Captain America and have access to 2 ranged taunts on top of other taunts, right? So the idea here is Captain America can be away from Nico and Wanda, and then, like, get over here, Scorpion style, while Wanda is debuffing them at the same time. And then while they're taunted, Wanda's sort of following them, right? Like, that's the whole idea. And then when it comes time to end the game, she goes, all right, no more, boom, headshot and self-destruct, and Captain America will help facilitate that setup by bringing some knockbacks as well. So he has enough taunts to keep Wanda alive in that close proximity to the enemies, and he has the knockbacks to facilitate clumping up for her massive AoE attacks. That's the idea, anyway. Spider-Man. So Spider-Man is a relatively powerful character, top 3 DPS, I would say, and his whole gimmick is either environmental attacks or incredibly, extremely bursty one-time use offense, and that's through the use of Spider Sense, Web Slinger, and then Infernal Spider in that order. Always, though, in the same turn, Web Slinger and Infernal Spider, but in that order as well. But then, what was the other one I just said? Spider Sense, you can use it before, but those 3 cards are pivotal into Spider-Man's massive burst damage. So, how do you facilitate that? Well, you use Doctor Strange to buff the cards in your hand. You then would use Captain Marvel. She's here because I think Spider-Man's damage outside of the outside of the burst damage is a little bit lacking compared to other DPS characters. So she's there to act as sort of a pseudo tank and then make up that damage differential that maybe Wolverine or Captain America wouldn't necessarily be able to do. Also, since Spider-Man is not particularly heroism hungry and Strange generates a ton of it, I was about to say Wanda. Captain Marvel can use it very well as a tank. I think Wolverine's use of heroism is a little bit lacking, and same with Captain America in comparison to Captain Marvel. So she is there because she can use up some of that heroism that you might be sort of sitting on, if you will. And yeah, so I think that team's pretty fun too. And last up, Wolverine. Again, Wolverine carry, a little bit awkward, but he is a bruiser. Doctor Strange, I think, just really synergizes well with chain characters, and Wolverine's damage does come a lot from chain attacks. And then Nico is there because I think Wolverine, while his damage is a little bit on the lower end, he is so self-sufficient, right? Like heals, taunts, apply vulnerability, strengthen, chain attacks, lifesteal, AoE, single target. Like he literally does it all. So Nico is just there as sort of a, hi, I'm going to buff and debuff the living heck out of everybody while you carry me. And then Doctor Strange says, hey, I'm just going to buff your cards. You do everything. That's it. It's kind of that simple. So you don't really need a dedicated DPS in this build because the burst damage that Nico does have on top of the consistent damage that Wolverine has is more than enough. And so Wolverine plus 2 supports is actually pretty scary. So if you're a big Wolverine fan and you make him your carry, I think the sky's the limit for you. Okay, that was a lot of talking on the same screen. That'll all be timestamped for you if you want to go back. Let's get into the actual fun stuff, because that stuff's all just kind of whatever. Starting with the story, normal, heroic difficulty teams. We're going to do all 4 of those first, and then we're going to do the 3 in the middle, and then I'll do the sort of outro stuff, okay? Now, I've taken the liberty of naming them all, and I hope you appreciate the names. So first up, we have Team Death Pits. This is the term that I've lovingly called drops, and I didn't even really mean to do it, but someone had commented on it, and now it's just stuck. So if I ever say Death Pits or Pits, I'm always referring to drops. Okay, drops is the technical term for it, but we don't call it that here. So I'll go through it all, and I'll add some little tidbits if necessary, but obviously you're welcome to pause and read through, and that way you can follow along with me as well. So the team comp will always be support, tank, and DPS, just to be clear. It's just from my point of reference, so I know who's what in order. So we have Magik, Captain Marvel, Ghost Rider, what is its game plan? Well, the idea is it uses the drops mechanic thoroughly, as we've already touched on a few times. It's very straightforward. The idea is you set up the death pits with either Ghost Rider or Magik. They both have options to do so. And then you essentially use any of these heavy CC characters to just yeet them in. And then when the pits are unavailable, there is plenty of damage here. That is why we've chosen Captain Marvel over Captain America, because she slaps a little harder than the homie, consistently anyway. And then she can sort of bridge that gap alongside Ghost Rider while we're waiting for the pit cards to come back, so to speak. Strengths and weaknesses. Instant kill potential. Well, that's a bit of a given, right? Plenty of CC. That's a bit of a given. High AoE damage. That comes in the form of Ghost Rider as well as Magik. Fun as heck to pilot. I think so. I think it's hilarious. Yeet. You just throw them into the pools. And yeah, you get to yeet people. I mean, really, that's the most important part of the comp. That's why people will be running this team. Like, that's the whole point, is to push people around. However, weaknesses, not very effective in boss fights. Now, obviously this can, like, it'll work, but if you've built the decks and you've built your whole team around the death pits and knockbacks, bosses, supervillains specifically, they can't be thrown into death pits. So that whole gimmick is completely useless. So you would have to redo the decks specifically for boss fights, which is fine, especially if you really like Ghost Rider and Magik. I think they're amazing together. But the way that I've built this page, it will not work against bosses all that well. And then relatively underwhelming without death pits open. What that means is, yes, they have, you know, good damage, but that's kind of it. These three characters, they don't... Like, Ghost Rider has a bit more nuance to his kit than the other two, but realistically, when the death pits are not live, this team kind of just falls apart, or it's not super thrilling, it's not super strong. And last thing is they have limited access to buffs and debuffs, so that's just meaning things like fast, strengthened, weakened, block, things like that, right? So yeah. Key cards. So key cards are for what's her face? Magik, Banish, Limbo Portal, Quick Slash, and Soul Blast. So the idea with these is, with the key cards, is I'm just kind of showcasing, these are suggestions that you should maybe have in your deck, or a card that functions in a very similar manner at least. And you don't have to take these cards, but they're decent. But given that 4 of 8, it's up to you. These are just my suggestions. Captain Marvel, Fists of Radiance is a knockback. Quick Jab is a knockback. One Step Ahead is just a nice little power spike for her. And then Rain of Blows is a sort of finisher ability. If you can't rely on the death pits, Rain of Blows is a really, really good choice for dealing some beefy burst damage. Ghost Rider, Drain Soul, that has to do with his passive. I put it there because his passive is pretty integral. If at any point you can KO with Ghost Rider in this comp, you should do it. Hellride is a really high damage heroic card which benefits from Magik's Gather. She can gather them all up and he can Hellride them all down. Hellmouth, that's how he opens the drop, that's the whole point. And then Lash is a forceful knockback. Pretty self-explanatory, he wants that. Now, to go down on the right side there, relevant info. Alternative picks are Captain America over Captain Marvel for more tankiness while having access to CC. So, I had said that she sort of bridges the gap in terms of damage, whereas America doesn't. But if you want to take this comp sort of to higher difficulties, you may actually prefer Captain America, because he's a bit more tanky and reliable. Whereas Captain Marvel takes a bit more work to play, or she will take a bit more work to play, and her whole thing with Go Binary and having, like, she consumes her own block, therefore she's only tanky sometimes. It's just a bit awkward, right? So Captain America is a good alternative. Use your plethora of knockbacks when you have pits open, otherwise save those cards if possible. I feel like that's a given. Maybe don't knock them back when you have, you know, death pits coming up soon. This third point I have in, I think, one other comp, but it's build the ability for all characters to get generic shove. This is important for the comp as it gives everyone another knockback. So in the Abbey, there are structures and things you can research and build and do and learn, such as like a place to treat injuries or learn the ability to shove, and that is basically like a little knockback. By picking this up, it just gives you another knockback, right? So while not mandatory nor required, I think it just adds to the whole gimmick of this composition. Now moving on to the cards, Banish is one of your two sources of drops. Yep. Limbo Portal is a key part of Magik's kit. Yep. Quick Soul Slash is great as it gives you a refund on KO, meaning if you kill a minion or push somebody into a pit, you can do it all over again. So Quick is essentially your card play is refunded if it kills. So that would be really beneficial if you happen to get that instant KO. Soul Blast is your main method of pushing foes into drops. So while any knockback will work, Forceful Knockback gives you just more control over enemies, and instead of stopping on other enemies, they just sort of all move. So yeah. Fist of Radiance is a strong attack with knockback. Go figure. One Step Ahead is just for drawing into your CC cards. So what that means is if you have no knockbacks in hand, but you have pits up and you have One Step Ahead in your hand, play One Step Ahead so that way you might be able to draw into a Captain Marvel knockback, right? That's what that means. Quick Jab provides another knockback, yeah, go figure, and same thing as Quick Soul Slash. If it gets a kill, it's a refunded card play, which is awesome. Rain of Blows is just a finisher, especially in boss battles. This sort of makes up that ability, or it makes up for them not being able to die in drops. Yeah, Drain Soul is part of his passive. I touched on this already. Hellride Helm. Oh yeah, I already talked about these. So that's that comp. The idea, again, Team Death Pits. You're opening holes in the ground, portals to hell, and you're just pushing people into them. Yes, it's RNG related, but I think it's a lot of fun. I think it's a fun way to play the game. And yeah, so that's what I've got for you. If that's your thing, go for it. Moving on to what I've dubbed Team XCOM. So I'm not going to spend as much time on this one as the last one because this shares a lot of things, as you can probably tell, given that it's Nico, Magik, and Ghost Rider. Immediately, you're going to notice there's no tank. That is one of the weaknesses. But let's go through it. So Team XCOM. This team uses all forms of RNG you can use in a single team in Midnight Suns, Nico and the drops mechanic. This is for someone who loves that element of gameplay and wants to build a coherent strategy around it. So Nico can do a lot of damage, and I think her buff and debuff game plan is very strong. It's her unreliability that holds her back. It's not her kit, it's the roulette that holds her back. So strengths and weaknesses, instant kill potential, that's a given. That's what drops are. Plenty of CC, high AoE damage, good amount of buffs and debuffs. Those are pretty much all the same as the last composition. The only difference is live and die by RNGesus. Well, that's true. And it's a callback to the XCOM franchise. Weaknesses. Live and die by RNGesus. No dedicated tank, as we've touched on. Positioning will be very important, and that goes hand in hand with the other point. So when you have no tank, obviously where your team is a bit more important because they're more vulnerable, right? You don't have taunts to sort of get them out of trouble. And then the strategy will require adjustment based on what you draw. Yeah. I mean, you could say that about any composition, but what I mean by that is Nico's cards will change as you draw them, so you might not get what you're looking for. So I'll do Nico cards last because they're the only ones that have changed, really. But the one difference between Magik is, again, so Banish, Portal, and Blast, these all have to do with pushing people into pits. Banish is the portal, and then with Ghost Rider, Hellmouth is the portal, and then Lash is a push into the portal. These are the same as the prior composition. However, Darkchild, as we see here, this one's different. Why do I have this here? Well, because you don't have a tank. Okay, so Darkchild essentially turns Magik into a tank for one turn. Gain Invulnerable, gain counter, taunt all enemies, exhaust. Invulnerable, that's a given, she doesn't take damage. Counter means when she does get attacked, she retaliates. And then taunt all enemies, she can get some heat off of Rider or Nico. Now, alternative picks are Wolverine over Ghost Rider if you don't want to go all in on the RNG. The reason why you would do this is by taking Wolverine instead of Ghost Rider, you've gone away from straight RNG, and now it's become a Nico carry composition. Remember, I had mentioned this in the main hero comps. I believe the comp was actually Wolverine and 2 supports. Same thing. Nico is the carry, two supports and Wolverine works really, really well together. So try him out, or if your Ghost Rider's injured, maybe consider taking Wolverine and see what you think. Use a plethora of knockbacks when pits are open. Yes. Building the shove is very important. Yes. Now, to get to Nico's cards, Blood Magic's a roulette card, which also provides a source of healing for your team, which is important considering there's no tank. So Blood Magic essentially gives your teammates lifesteal, which is a form of healing, right? But the other reason why it's here is the whole point of the team is XCOM, so you want to take as many roulette cards as possible. That's the whole point, right? Like that's the gimmick of the deck. Curse, same thing, it's a roulette card, but what makes it particularly special is it applies vulnerable, which in my opinion is one of the strongest debuffs in the game. Double up is kind of cool in that it generates a copy of certain cards in your hand. It will decide itself between either attack, heroic, or skill. So yeah, RNG. And Empower is just a really good card, period. Reduce the cost of all heroics in hand to 0. So you'll notice that Banish is a 3-cost skill that opens a drop. The problem with it being 3 cost just to open a drop, think about this for a second, right? Think about this theoretically. You could spend 3 heroism for nothing. Think about that for a second. You could spend 3 heroism to replace an enemy with a drop, which means that you're just sort of omitting that enemy, so you can't kill that enemy, you can't do damage to that enemy, they're just sort of lifted off the battlefield for a bit. For a chance to do nothing. That's expensive. That's an expensive risk. Not one that I'm particularly keen on taking. And most interestingly, this might be a hot take. I don't think Banish is a good card, but that's a conversation for another day. Yeah. Limbo Portal is a key part of Magik's kit. Yep. Soul Blast. Like we've talked about these already in the last composition. This one's very similar, just Nico is thrown in the mix instead of Captain Marvel. That's Team XCOM. Next one, Team Daywalkers. This is one that people have been harassing me for a while, and I mean that in the most polite way. So, I think Blade is a horrible character because I don't think just bringing literal raw DPS is a good enough thing to do in this game. I think you're going to need more than that to do the higher difficulties consistently. Now, I will eventually run a Blade run, right? I'll make content on that because I'll hate every second of it and you guys will love every second of it, I'm sure. But I still don't think he's a very good character. So this is Team Daywalker, named after Blade himself. This is Doctor Strange, Captain America, and Blade. If you don't already know how this works, Blade is the carry. So, unlike most carry comps, you don't actually necessarily want to spend your heroism on Blade, which I know sounds a bit strange. But the reason why is he doesn't need to use his heroic cards he doesn't necessarily need them to apply bleed. And you'll see on the screen, right? I have Make 'em Bleed and The Hunger. Those are incredible bleed cards, and then he has other ones that are Chain Bleed for no heroic cost. It's actually quite interesting, and the fact that Reaper doesn't cost a heroism, I think, is ridiculous. I think that's absurd, but we'll get there. I'm getting ahead of myself. The concept with the party is that you stack bleed as much as you can before you Reaper, and then if Reaper doesn't kill everybody, that's where Glaive comes in, right? And then play around Blade entirely. Use your move on him as priority and be sure to peel for him with your other teammates. So what that means is you get 1 move per turn. Prioritize keeping Blade in the best position possible. That doesn't mean the safest position necessarily, but the best position possible. Now, Captain America has a couple ranged taunts. That's very, very good in this situation. And Doctor Strange also has peeling as well. So, strengths and weaknesses, very high DPS, a fairly tanky team, many buffs and debuffs, lots of hand and deck manipulation, high heroism generation, flexible roster for Hunter editions. So, this is one example where I explicitly state flexible roster for Hunter editions because if you run a light Hunter, just take out Doctor Strange. That's fine. If you run a Dark Hunter, same thing. Maybe replace America with like Wolverine, and then run Hunter instead of Strange. Excuse me. Or you could even run like a no support team comp and run like say Magik, Blade, and Dark Hunter, right? I think that Hunter fits in very well with this comp, which is weird, but I'm specifically referring to Light Hunter. So let me actually there. Light Hunter editions. I think that's that's a bit more appropriate. Weaknesses: limited CC, struggles versus cleanses. Now this is me being presumptuous. I'm assuming that there will be enemies in the game that can cleanse debuffs. Like, surely, right? So, surely. That whole thing would pretty much kill the bleed idea, or it could potentially. Therefore, it's a weakness. A bit one trick in its game plan. Well, yeah, the whole game plan is let Blade run around and kill everything with bleed. But if that's not working, maybe not. Relies on Blade for its damage output. Kind of goes hand in hand. And then no ranged DPS options. So what that means is, say if you're fighting Venom, who has symbiote skin debuff, you don't really want to use melee attacks. You'd rather use something ranged. So yeah. Cards. Blessing, or alternative picks are Magik over Strange for more CC, Nico over Strange for more debuff gameplay, or Wolverine if you want to run a double bruiser style. What I mean by that is Wolverine instead of Captain America, and you could run Wolverine with Blade. Okay. Keep Blade up and free of CC at all costs. Without him, there's no real damage output. That's just more of a reminder to don't let Blade die. Combat items to support Blade would be my suggestion. What these are depends on the mission. So that could be things like give concealment, taunt enemies off of him, give block, like whatever it is, take it with Blade in mind and you'll be fine. Blessing of Ashanti is your best means of buffing Blade's DPS without bleed. That's because Blessings of Ashanti gives cards in hand plus 5 damage until played, and generates heroism. Agamotto's Gaze, pretty self-explanatory. Draw the last 2 attacks played. It means you can just cycle bleeds and chains all over again. Plus the following turn you get 4 plays, which lets Blade apply more bleed following turn, right? Vapors of Valflor. It's a very thematic card to take, right? The whole vampire hunter thing. So it's edgy, it's kind of shadowy, so it fits. But it actually works really well in the team because you can apply concealed to either Strange or an ally. So if Blade is in a precarious position, boom, concealment, and it might be all he needs to survive that extra turn and win the mission, right? Shield of the Seraphim is another means of protecting Blade, and that's via resist. So that's just there when you need it. Although again, for 3, it's a little pricey at 3 cost, but that's okay. Blade doesn't need the heroism really. Moving on to America, Dig In is for protecting Blade. Go figure. And shield bounces for protecting Blade, go figure. Best defense is interesting because you gain block equal to damage dealt for 2 turns, and then Spang does a lot of damage if the enemy is targeting America. So the synergy here is you'd use up your block, right? You'd tank, use your taunts, tank, and then best defense, boom, and then Spang, maybe even on the same turn, boom, and now you're generating massive amounts of block and you're dealing pretty solid damage as well. So Captain America is just, that's a nice little sort of synergy that you can get, and I think it's quite valuable because in this team, Blade is literally all your damage outside of that little synergy. So Blade's cards. So Make 'em Bleed and Hunger, these are basically just saying take the bleed cards, right? Just take the bleed cards. Make 'em Bleed basically just helps if there are cards that don't have bleed, it gives them bleed, so it opens up the deck options a little bit more. I would suggest running it for the card draw more than anything, plus the heroism generation, obviously, but it's still a good card nonetheless. Hunger, Marked is incredibly strong. Marked is when that enemy dies, it refunds the cost again. So That's very good. So you can essentially apply marked to every enemy with bleed, meaning if you go Hunger Reaper same turn or Hunger Glaive same turn and you kill things, all of a sudden you get that card play back. Right? So that's really strong. It's really strong. Reaper at zero has a heroism I think is crazy for what it does, but it does consume all the bleed stacks, so you do have to be careful. But still a very strong burst nuke card. And then Glaive is there, sort of your secondary bleed slash secondary nuke. So one thing you can do is if you have a nice positioning and you've buffed your team or your hand already with Strange, right, Vishanti, enemies are bleeding, you're in their way, and basically it's, okay, they're all bleeding, boom, Hunger, boom, Reaper, boom, Glaive. Oh, I have another play because of how Hunger worked. Boom, finish them off with Spang or something, and you win, right? So that's Team Daywalker. I think that's one of the best ways to sort of play Blade. Honestly, though, honestly, any support with any tank with Blade will work just fine. I just think this is one of the better ways to do it, but it's just me. Next up and last for sort of the normal difficulty or quote-unquote fun compositions is Team Endgame, right? So this one is sort of it's a throwback to Avengers Endgame. But I think it's actually pretty strong. So it's Doctor Strange, Spider-Man, and Iron Man. When they were all up in space, that's when they were all together. So the issue with this composition is it's going to struggle to deal with heavy focus. So none of these characters can really take a punch for very long. But the game plan is to use Doctor Strange to buff up the Iron Man cards, and then Iron Man is your primary carry, whereas Spider-Man will use his environmental attacks when he can. And then Bind, like I've said before, is an incredibly strong form of CC, so he brings that to the trio. And then this is the kind of comp where you want to stack your heroism, stack your heroism, stack your heroism, stack your heroism, boom, go. And the way you do that is Web Slinger plus Infernal Spider plus whatever's left, Iron Man cards that you have been redrawing this whole time, right? So strengths and weaknesses, nuke style offense. If you're into big, massive damage in one turn, like one shot, one kill, this team will be pretty solid. Very flexible game plan. So what that means is either you can go environmental attacks, you can go chain attacks, you can go AoE, you can go single target, you can go Spider-Man carry, and you can go Iron Man carry. All of those work. Just depends on the fight. Good CC with Thwip. Honestly, Thwip alone means they have good CC. That's how good I think Thwip is. Lots of hand and deck manipulation. You just get this from running Doctor Strange in general, but all three of these characters have draw, so there will be a lot of draw power in the deck. High heroism generation. That's just from Doctor Strange and his passive. Strong environmental attack options. Well, you're running Spider-Man. I mean, does that really need an explanation? Weaknesses, no dedicated tank. We've talked about this a few times already, but essentially the problem without having a tank and 3 squishies, relatively squishy, is that they're going to die pretty fast. There's no lifesteal here, right? There's no healing, really, unless, Doctor Strange has something later, but there is Iron Man who can give block to people, but that's pretty much it. Very card play heavy. So what that means is this is the kind of comp where you need to do a lot of stuff in one turn in order for it to be worth it. So you have to be careful, and you have to use Agamotto's Gaze smartly. You have to use Spider-Man's free actions correctly. Things like that. And then overkill on the damage. So what that means is, frankly, because you're running 2 DPS in a support, it's probably unnecessary to do that. So it's a bit of there's wasted value here for sure. Dies to focus fire, lacks peel for allies. So focus fire we touched on, lacks peel for allies. There's no taunts, there's no stuns outside of Thwip. There's not too many knockbacks. There'll be a few, but not too many. So it's hard to get people to get off of your team. Right. So relevant information, defensive combat items would be the correct choice. This is because you don't have a tank. Blessing of Ashanti is how you'll be buffing Iron Man cards after redraw. Yep. Agamotto's Gaze is a good way to recycle cards and start your final nuke. So you want to use Agamotto's Gaze the turn before you use Web Slinger, Infernal Spider, Air Superiority, Hellbeam, whatever, right? So use Agamotto's Gaze the turn before you're gonna win, basically. Astral Meditation. Astral Meditation is a really interesting card, even though it has Exhaust. I think it's really, really good. And here's one for you. I think Exhaust is good because it's essentially a deck thinner, right? If you think about it that way, the more Exhaust cards you take and use, the less cards you have to go through, right? So Exhaust is not as bad as some people may think it is. Astral Meditation is good because it gives you that combat item back for that mission, and then, well, I'm assuming you don't keep it permanently. If you keep it permanently, then it's even better than I thought it was. But I'm gonna assume that it means restore one combat item used this mission for that mission. And then 2 redraws. The reason why that's the most important part of the kit is because Iron Man wants redraws. That's his whole gimmick, is send his cards back for later and then get them again and they're stronger. Send them back, get them back. Send them back, get them back. Vapors of Valtor, we talked about it a little bit with Blade, but it's going to be one of the only peels that this team has access to, so I think it's a must run, and then save it in your hand until you need it. Spider Sense is a good setup card and fills your hand before Infernal Spider. So by drawing 2 and giving yourself 2 heroism, it just gives you the option to make more plays with the Web Slinger Infernal Spider synergies, right? Thwip is an amazing CC. It's incredible. Yeah. Web Slinger, Infernal Spider, they're essentially the same. I look at them as the same card. So you gain Strengthened, means you're stronger. Go figure. Also an Exhaust card. And then Infernal Spider, your next 3 Spider-Man cards are free. Also Exhaust. So the idea is you would use Spider Sense, Web Slinger, Infernal Spider, Spider-Man card. Like you just go. Like you just rip through your hand. And so the idea is you would use your Spider-Man nuke separate from your Iron Man nuke, because you want to do this when your Iron Man cards are being redrawn, right? Which, just to clarify, it means you hit the redraw button, you send the card back in your deck, and you draw a new one. It's like a mulligan. Okay, so do your Spider-Man nuke separate from your Iron Man nuke, because it's going to be too heroic, costly to do both in the same turn, and you're not really going to have the amount of card plays that you need to do so. Okay? But the Spider-Man nuke in this team is insane. Moving on to Iron Man's cards. Air Superiority, while it is a bit pricey, if you've redrawn it a few times, it's incredibly powerful. Leave It to Me is very similar to Spider Sense, right? Draw 2 Iron Man cards plus 2 redraws. It's like Astral Meditation meets Spider Sense. It's very good. It's very good. Marked Target is incredibly strong. Applying Marked for refunds and then Vulnerable for extra damage is just crazy to me. I think that card is ridiculous. And then Heads Up is strictly there because it gives a bit of block to Iron Man or an ally. If you have a traditional support tank Iron Man, you don't need Heads Up, right? That's just the long short of it. You're not going to need Heads Up with a more traditional team composition. But this is one of those situations where you'd want it. That's Team Endgame. And that wraps it up for story comps. Again, I'm going to come back to this. So these are like just fun, theory crafted ideas, right? Fun to run. They use a lot of the cast, sort of spread out. But now we're going to bump into heroic ultimate difficulty teams. These have a little more nuance, a little more going on. And I think they're going to be some of the strongest compositions, or at least darn close to the strongest compositions. So we just finished Team Endgame. Let's do Team Top Tier. And you'll already notice there's a bit more writing on this one than the other ones, because I think there's just that much more to talk about. So, Team Top Tier. Doctor Strange, Wolverine, Iron Man. Literally, I think these are the best in slot characters for their respective roles. Strange for support, Wolverine for tank, and Iron Man for DPS. There is one reason why I think Wolverine is the best tank in the game, and it is the only reason why I think he's the best tank in the game, and that is because he has the self-revive. On the highest difficulty, you do not get your free combat revive. They take it away. Every other difficulty gets one except for the highest ultimate tier. Meaning that in those situations where, like, let's say this game, like, death is, you know, it's gonna happen, you're gonna want Wolverine, right? Otherwise, you're fighting the rest of the mission with 2 units, which just sucks. So I think Wolverine's insane. Doctor Strange, I think, is insane. As long as you can get over the fact that he doesn't really have a lot of CC, he has Winds of Watum, which you see on the screen, and we'll talk about Winds of Watum in a bit here. But oh, there's a gap there. I'll fix it later. Yeah, I think that he's pretty crazy, and there we go. So yeah, let's get into it. So this team's designed around the top tier characters in each role. Each character provides their own power and brings enough team to pull their weight. But if you have to narrow it down and say what it's about, Doctor Strange buffs Iron Man's cards after being redrawn, while Wolverine is just a God mode tank. So Wolverine, again, has that self-revive, and he does pretty good damage if you don't have a good Iron Man turn. I think Wolverine can probably pick up the slack in that sense. Peel for your team as needed by positioning Wolverine in the way of enemies, but focus more on using Iron Man's cards and redrawing them as often as you can. So what that means is there might be turns where you don't use a Doctor Strange card because you're using an extra Iron Man card, and that's okay. That's fine. You don't have to play one of each character each turn. Okay? Strengths and weaknesses. High DPS, both single target and AoE. Well, yeah, Iron Man does everything. And then Wolverine has chain. So yeah, of course they're good at everything. Flexible game plan. Yep. Plenty of options. That means things like utility, card decisions. You'll notice that Iron Man and Doctor Strange actually have a lot of text on their cards, or a lot of things that they do. And so that adds to the layers of options that they have, or the amounts of options rather. And the layers, I guess. Lots of hand and deck manipulation, high heroism generation, and then very rewarding when played well. The reason why I have that in there specifically is on the weaknesses. I have difficult to optimize gameplay because if you're sending your Iron Man cards away, you have to time your Vishanti, figure out when to use Agamotto's Gaze. Wolverine may not have the most taunts in the world or access to block in the world, which means Iron Man and Strange might be in compromised positions here and there. So you kind of have to figure out how to navigate that. Oops. Yeah. So weaknesses, limited CC options. They basically have none. No great environmental attacks, or not great for environmental attacks. That just means there's not a whole lot of knockback, right? Forceful knockback, so it's hard to take full advantage of the environment. Iron Man requires multiple card plays just for him. Well, that's his whole gimmick, but it is a weakness nonetheless. And then redraws can force a slower game in the early turns. Well, that's because you might need a card, but you're like, it's not really worth it. I'm just going to send it back. But now you don't have a strong turn either. So it might delay the progress of the mission by a little bit. So in terms for Strange, if you want more CC, Captain America over Wolverine if you want an alternative tank who has a bit more access to taunts and CC, and then Scarlet Witch over Iron Man if he's injured. So you really always want to be running Iron Man if you want to take like the strongest DPS in the game, in my opinion. But that is not always going to be possible, right? That's just the reality of the game. And assuming that you run this comp, you're probably running on higher difficulties where injuries are indeed enabled. So you have to be careful. Blessing of the Vishanti is how you buff Iron Man's cards. Yep. Agamotto's Gaze is a way to recycle the hand to keep Iron Man doing his thing. Astral Meditation refills your combat items and gives you more redraws, which is good for Iron Man. Wings of Watum is, if you weren't already going to run it, it's one of your only CC abilities in this team composition, so it's very important that you do run it, or some other form of knockback that Doctor Strange may or may not have. Berserk, I have this here because, I feel like most people would be smart enough to take this one, but maybe not. So I felt like I should add it just in case. I think this card's really, really strong because in the event where you don't have a good Ironman nuke, you don't have a really good Ironman setup, but you really need to finish the mission, but you have Berserk in hand, that's a good way to sort of be like, okay, let's get this going here, right? Draw 3 Wolverine cards. Sorry, I keep yawning. And then he gains Lifesteal, which can act as sort of a top-up, right? So if you don't have the heal, Rapid Regeneration, or not Rapid Regeneration, the heal card, Berserk can act as a heal for Wolverine, so you do keep that in mind. Rapid Regeneration really needs no explanation. It's the free res. Nothing more to say. Stink of Fear, the worst animation in the whole game, Sniff Sniff, is an AoE taunt and a counter, which is really strong. I've been talking in the camera too long. And then Power Slash, I know it's a bit blurry. That is what it is. That's the screenshots that we have. Is good because it's a decent damage knockback and it applies vulnerable. So I had said earlier in the video that I think vulnerable is one of the stronger options in the game. The fact that Wolverine can apply it I think is really, really strong. But then also knockback because it's going to be one of the only CCs you have in the whole deck. So there is that. And then Iron Man, we talked mostly about him already with the Endgame composition, but to reiterate, Air Superiority is an incredibly good DPS option or card. Leave It to Me allows Iron Man to play his game plan. You draw more Iron Man cards to play more Iron Man cards to redraw more Iron Man cards, all of which buff his passive or his game plan. Mark Target, same thing. It just lets him hit even harder, and it can count as one of his plays in a turn. And then New Plan is awesome because it just doubles your heroism, which sounds broken, but when you consider that heroism maxes out at 10, you know, it's not broken. But the idea with this New Plan card is you would save it and you would keep it until you needed it, right? So this would be a situation where maybe you're trying to close out the game and you're at 2 heroism, but you need 4, but you only have 1 more card play, or 2 more card plays, and one of which is an attack card, which only gives 1 heroism, yada, yada, yada. You can play New Plan, double your heroism, get what you need, and then, yeah, move on. I was starting to lose my train of thought there, so I'll just move on. Alternative picks. Oh, I did that already. Sorry. Moving on. Team Spirit Bomb. Woof. Long video. Sorry. Team Spirit Bomb. Send me your energy. So you'll notice right away that this is the alternatives to the Team Top Tier, right? So Team Spirit Bomb is Magik, America, and Wanda, which are, again, the 3 that I had said for Team Top Tier. Now, if you were to replace all 3, they actually get a completely different game plan entirely. I don't know why these cards are moving. They were correct before, but that's okay. Yeah. The idea with this composition is quite simple. You would you just group them all up with Magik, right? And then it's a lot of damage. And then Captain America also kind of controls their positioning a little bit with his knockbacks. And then Wanda just goes in there and just nukes everybody. It's quite literally that simple in terms of design. And yeah, that's what you would do. Group them up and knock them down effectively. Also, oh, so strengths and weaknesses, lots of buffs and debuffs. Yeah, that comes from Wanda. Plenty of CC, that comes from Magik. High AoE damage comes from Wanda. And then well-rounded team comp. I think this comp's actually really, really good. I think that this is probably the second strongest comp in the game, or at least it's up there. It's top 3 for sure. And unlike Team Top Tier, I think this comp is brain dead easy. I think every card plays itself. The only catch would be positioning for Wanda. So weaknesses, lacks hand and deck manipulation, not much damage outside of Wanda. So you'll notice that weaknesses list is quite short because there's not that many, but the weaknesses that are there, lacks hand and deck manipulation means less options, and not much damage outside of Wanda means if she's CC'd, she goes down. or you're not really getting the cards you need from her, you might just be hooped in terms of damage output. So alternative picks are Ghost Rider for Wanda. The reason for this is the reason I didn't say Iron Man specifically, because that's a given, is you would rather run Iron Man with something else, right? Like just in general, you would rather use him in a different way compared to Ghost Rider. Also, because it's magic, this is clipping and it's bothering me. Because it's magic, Ghost Rider automatically gains just a little bit of value because of the drops system, right? So there we go. There is that as well. Ghost Rider's an awesome sub-in for Wanda if you need to. Use a plethora of knockbacks when pits are open. That's a given. Banish again is the only drop in this composition, but if you happen to run Ghost Rider, you do have access to another drop as well. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit to Wanda's cards, as we've talked about Magik and Cap a lot already. So Wanda has a lot of cards that we don't really know about yet because she is such a late game hero. Do keep that in mind as well. Actually, I'll write that. She's not available right away, so that could be a bit of a downside if you wanted to run this right away. But Wanda's cards are cool. So essentially, she has buffs, debuffs. She can make her AoEs a lot bigger, and that's with Unleashed. And then her ultimate is sort of a self-destruct button where she goes pop and she does exuberant amounts of damage to everyone around her. Plus, she can also give her teammates resist, which is kind of cool. So you actually want to play this comp quite close together, where all three characters are in somewhat close proximity. Yeah, not a whole lot to say here. I think this comp is good, although just not quite as involved as some of the other compositions, but I do think that it's still quite good. And last but not least, and holy mackerel, the fact that these are all moved slightly is the worst, man. The worst. Alright, whatever. Is what I've lovingly called Team E-Friendly or Team Environmentally Friendly. I think this composition is actually really strong, and it completely revolves around Spider-Man as your DPS. So if you're a big Spidey guy, this might be a great team for you. So pretty much just take Iron Man out and put Spider-Man in, and you've got a dang near top tier team. But what's the catch? Is it the same team? Well, no, it's not. So game plan. It looks to use Wolverine and Spider-Man's chain attacks to clean up a bunch of enemies at once, then cash out with your exhaustive heroic cards to just win the game. And then the idea is, since environmental attacks are, you know, a mechanic that Spider-Man really uses, you want to try to take full advantage of those where you can. And if you really like that stuff, I think this is a strong team, as I said already. Strengths and weaknesses, plenty of different damage sources. So Wolverine does a lot of different damage types, or has a lot of different damage skills, rather. Spider-Man has regular damage, chain, burst damage, environmental attacks, knockbacks. He's sort of a jack of all DPS, so he's good in that respect. Plenty of CC options, lots of hand and deck manipulation, high heroism generation. If the team has Doctor Strange in it, you can expect those last 2 bullet points to be in there. Weaknesses, lacks burst damage without expensive heroics, and your only big damage comes from exhaust cards. Those are kind of 2 points in one, which is why I said them back to back. So the trouble is, we've talked about this already, but Webslinger into Infernal Spider, or like Spidey Sense into Webslinger into Infernal Spider is so good, but they're exhaustive cards. Meaning it's a one and done situation, and same thing with Wolverine's heroic card. It's one of the better ones on the tanks, where he just eats all your heroism and just goes to town on everybody. It's very strong if you save up as much heroism as you can, which Spider-Man can do. So keep that in mind. The only things I might suggest, you could run Magik over Doctor Strange if you just want to all in the environmental attacks. I just don't think it's necessary because Spider-Man has so many environmental attacks, like gimmicks. I didn't think Magik really fit the bill. Blessing of Ashanti, we've talked about it so many times now. Buffing your chain cards with it is really strong. Vapors of Valtor is a piece of peel that Wolverine does not have, so even though I rate Wolverine as top 1 tank, remember it's only for the revive, it's not for his damage, it's not for his tankiness, it's not even for his CC, like it's not for any of that, it's for the res. Okay. Axe of Angarumus. Axe of Angarumus. Yeah, we'll get there eventually. Benefits from storing heroism, which this team just does, so it's a good option, right? It's, oh, you know, my Wolverine's incapacitated and I don't have great Spider-Man cards, but I need some chunky damage. Axe of Angarumus comes in. Oh, typo. Chain Ard. We're not playing The Witcher. Card. Lethal Pounce. So this is just this. The reason I have this here is it's an example of a chain card. Take them. Kind of that simple. Not much to say. Rapid Regeneration. Self-res. Makes him insane. Eviscerate. I have this one here though specifically. A, it's chain. B, it's taunt. But C, it's lifesteal. So this is a means of Wolverine to heal himself, which is quite important. And then his Midnight Special does a whole ton of damage to people in a nearby area, so long as you have high heroism. And then Opportunist is interesting because it makes your environmental attacks cost 0, or rather the next 2 cost 0, and you get 2 moves per turn, which means that you can reposition your entire team because 3 moves per turn, three teammates, right? That's pretty well why that's really good, on top of, again, the environmental attacks. Whip, one of the best CCs in the game, and then Web Slinger and Infernal Spider are your nukes. We've talked about those already before as well. Okay, so that does it for environmentally friendly. Sorry I kind of stumbled along the way there. It's a lot to talk about. I spent so many hours on this, like so many hours on this. And the game's not even out. Like, yeah. So I hope you enjoyed that. Please use it as a reference. The link to the document will be below if you want to bookmark that and save it. I'd appreciate the comments and even just the views. I appreciate you all. And yeah, let me know what you think. Let me know if there's a comp on here that I didn't really touch on, or if there's something on this list that you're like, I think I have a better version of that, and tell me why. Like, let's get into that discussion, because I can't tell you how many, like, these are only some of the comps that I was thinking about, not even all of them. So yeah, thanks so much for watching, guys. And again, timestamps are below if you want to sift through and find something again, or whatever. And I will see you in the next one. Have a lovely rest of your day.